Hello, everybody, on this Christmas Day, December 25, Two Chaps Many Cultures, episode 120. Today we'll talk about how traditions that are not Christian still can have an affiliation with a Christian holiday like Christmas. Stay tuned. Merry Christmas, everybody.
Yes.
Those of you who observe the tradition, some of you may not, and yet we still put the decoration out just because we can. There we go.
Absolutely. How are you, mate? Merry Christmas.
Thank you, thank you. We're very merry here.
Very merry, very merry. What did you have to eat, by the way? Are you eating today? What's on the menu?
More eating. These past 6 weeks have been really good for me. My meat section, first Thanksgiving and then this, and then my birthday in between. That's not a good time of the year for staying skinny. We broke with our tradition in our home in southern German homes. I think it's a tradition to have a fancy but not too fancy Christmas Eve dinner, and then have a very opulent meal on Christmas Day. Typically a roasted goose, oven roasted goose. We did neither of this. We had fish last night with a few accoutrements that went very well with it. And today is going to be leftovers day because we made so much that we don't need to cook today. What about you?
Yeah, same thing. But traditional Polish Christmas Eve. We decided to support a local restaurant here and ordered the food in earlier, and it was really great. Traditional Polish restaurant, traditional Polish fare. So it was, quite a nice little small, low-key Christmas, of course, for this year, as everybody is doing. And yes, we have plenty of leftovers too. We certainly overserved ourselves when it comes to, but in good cause. Very good local Polish restaurant here. But food is something that connects us to this holiday, and different people eat different things at Christmas. But it is, and of course, we can point to different Christmas traditions around the world, Christian traditions. As you mentioned, eating fish, we do that here, the Polish tradition as well. So we eat no meat, and it actually is enforced for the whole day. But there are, what are people that don't practice, who are not of the Christian faith? They still obviously may take the day off because nobody else is going to be working, and so what would they do? So this has come out. We're interested that there is a lot of traditions, and we're going to talk about one today, where Jewish people in the early 20th century were drawn towards Chinese food as a way of still gathering people around, not necessarily celebrating the holiday as a Christian in the Christian tradition, but getting people around a set of fare which has many different or gave them many different opportunities to eat around a table, a shared table, and Chinese food does that. I mean, I think Chinese food does that for all of us, doesn't it?
Well, to a certain degree, yes. And I found it interesting to hear about this because I never heard of this tradition, Chinese food in Jewish families on Christmas, because it's a very North American Jewish tradition. It is not observed, not to my knowledge at least, in other parts of the world where there's bigger pockets of Jewish population. And I think that there's many different roots to this tradition that shaped in the early 20th century, as you said. First of all, Chinese people, most of them are not Christians, so they didn't celebrate Christmas. Jews didn't celebrate Christmas. Well, and if you want to go out to eat, or if you want some food and don't want to cook it yourself on Christmas, your options will be limited in North America. So Chinese restaurants were open, and Jews saw themselves going there. I also heard from my Jewish friends that when the Jewish immigration wave came from Europe from the late 19th century into the 1930s, a lot of these European, Central Eastern European Jewish families wanted to present themselves as affluent or as middle class or striving towards fulfilling the American dream. And Chinese food served two purposes. A, it gave them this idea of cosmopolitanism. Oh, now we're in this new world in America, and look here, we have Asian food. And also Chinese cuisine doesn't use a lot of dairy, which makes it easier for Jews who separate dairy from meat products to be, at least to assume that it's kosher what they're eating. So it's not mixed up in a non-kosher way. So Chinese food made that a lot easier for Jews who were looking for food that would serve their traditions and also feed them on a day when the Christians were staying home roasting their geese, right?
Yeah,
or whatever.
Yeah. And there's a great podcast I listen to called the China History Podcast, and there's a string of episodes, I think it's 5 or 6 episodes, where they talk about the Jewish refugees from refugees from Lithuania coming to China, being kind of given asylum of sorts in Shanghai. And then some of those families actually moved to the US. So I guess it probably would have been quite good for them, to turn up in a country that is still foreign to them, be embedded in their culture of Judaism, but also then surprisingly finding that we're coming to a place where where people are already eating Chinese food. This is an interesting that was mentioned in that episode, and it got me into exploring this topic because this is a stereotype. There's kind of a stereotype. We live not far from a very large Jewish community here, and the stereotype is always Chinese food for the Jewish community. But so, as all stereotypes, there is some truth to it. The other part about it was interesting to find out to find out about that, and I'm not sure. I don't see this in the Polish cuisine tradition so much. But apparently there was an Eastern European connection to the mixing of sweet and sour tastes, which I hadn't actually seen that in Polish cuisine a lot, but maybe it does exist in other more Eastern European countries. So that's kind of led me down the path of exploring this even more. Of course, my learned colleague here was the one that came up with this topic, and it just triggered this thing. What a fascinating topic, because it shows where two cultures from completely different foreign origins, can come together and have an affinity with each other, and provide each other with actual food, right? To get together with their family. I think it's fascinating.
And I'm so happy that we have an audience who can corroborate what these two middle-aged goyims are talking about, because my friend David Israel said, yes, we do. Right. We're safe. Hey, thanks for confirming, David. So, listen, folks. We talk from experience. We don't make this stuff up. Merry Christmas. Right. Now, there's another thing that I think is super interesting, especially as we talk about Jewish traditions that are Central European, because as most of you know, the Jewish faith consists of several tribes. One of them, the Central European tribe, that of the Ashkenazi, and the majority of Jewish people you find in North America are either descendants of or belonging to the Ashkenazi tribe or to the Sephardic tribe, which is more the Mediterranean, Iberian Peninsula, maybe Northern African tribe. And their food traditions have mixed with those in Europe for centuries, right? So I come from the Alpine region of Europe, and there's a baking tradition that is typical for around Hanukkah. It's this braided yeast bread called challah, right?
Oh, yeah.
And I saw it yesterday. My wife and I went to the market, to the farmer's market here, to get our supplies, our groceries for Christmas. And sure enough, in the baking section, huge loaves of challah. And I thought, Hanukkah is already over. I guess they just kept baking it, all right? And my wife, and as do many people in southern Germany, and I would argue in Austria, Switzerland, maybe even northern Italy, have that same baking tradition. I'm not sure, maybe in Poland and Czech Republic they do as well. My wife bakes these. We don't call them challah. We don't have a Hebrew name or Yiddish name for it. We call it something else, but it's the same baking tradition, right? So how one tradition influences that of a neighboring culture or subculture or religion, right? So how Chinese culture influences North American Jewish culture just by crossing fates, I guess, or just because of a connection. It's as we've been preaching, talking about this. Yes, we want to be cognizant, aware of what separates us or what makes us unique, but let's look for what connects us, what we have in common, and let's celebrate the beauty in that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and this is an example where two of these cultures kind of found each other and served each other in many ways, whereas some of the early communities in the boroughs of New York where this kind of originated, there was Italians opened restaurants for Italian people, and so each kind of subculture kind of gathered together and opened up restaurants for each other. But the Chinese came along, looking for, and of course they bought their cuisine, but there probably wasn't a large degree of Chinese people there that were so they were kind of as you say before, this is something that was maybe seen as a little cosmopolitan. You could express that you've made it, and now you're eating outside of your culture. It's a bit of sophistication, something like that. So there's many reasons why these cultures come along, but it doesn't mean we have to wait for them to come along. As Christian says, we use this, we spread our wings, we push the boundaries of what we eat, and what which is great. What does David say here?
Yeah, he just confirms what we said in the intro, that the Chinese restaurants were the only ones that were open. So you're hungry, Jewish, you're not celebrating Christmas, you want to eat, you have your chow mein, I guess.
Absolutely, yeah.
Now, I'm curious, maybe some of you who are watching this or are aware of it, I would suspect that Mexican food traditions, especially northern Mexican food, might be influenced by the Chinese cuisine as well, as a lot of Chinese came to build the railroads in the southwestern U.S. and in northern Mexico. Right there, a lot of the northern Chinese cuisine has some sweet sour influences from Chinese cuisine. I wonder, maybe that had an impact on how people in Catholic Mexico celebrate Christmas. Who knows? There might be so many intersections that we're not aware of. You reminded me of one in Japan.
Yeah,
and less than 1% of people in Japan are of Christian faith, so it's by no means a Christian country, and yet somehow there is a Christian tradition or a Christmas tradition in Japan. Brett, what is it?
Eating Kentucky Fried Chicken.
Yeah, totally makes sense, right? Why not?
Obvious.
Do we know why?
Why would you? I'm sorry.
I believe it was the rebuilding through the U.S. after World War II, when the country was still trying to regain its foothold, and U.S. fast food became wildly popular in the 50s and 60s in Japan, and at some point KFC seized the opportunity, I guess, to brand itself as the Christmas meal. And I've heard from people in Japan that they line up for hours outside of KFCs to get their Christmas buckets. And a lot of the smart Japanese who plan this ahead, they order it a week out and then only pick it up when it's time for it to be picked up. But if you didn't order in advance, you're going to stand out there and wait for your Christmas bucket of KFC.
Absolutely. Fantastic.
And fascinating.
And fascinating. I mean, this could get you down to some rabbit holes. I'm telling you, start exploring this kind of stuff. See people eating strange things. I actually came across. Well, here's another one. Here's another one for you. Going to in Poland, not far from our house in Poland, is the small town called Brzeszko. In the square of Brzeszko is this kind of like an innocuous-looking type of takeout store, but they serve hero type food, right? Middle Eastern type food, but instead of the bread, you know, that traditional kind of a hero roll that we see with that, you know, they slice the meat off. In Poland, they've actually they don't want to do with the bread, so they actually lay a bed of French fries down, and then they put the meat, because it's, you know, you've got to, when you get something that is already not healthy, why not just make it even more unhealthy? Right? But it is. Oh, it's succulent. It's great. It's got all the accoutrement, all the condiments and everything that you would see in a traditional, you know, Mediterranean hero type sandwich. The meat and everything like that, but instead it's laid on a base. So I'm kind of I ask around there. You know, it's this typical thing where you ask around and say, now who thought of this up? You know, who was the brain that thought up in the middle of Poland? Was there a Mediterranean chef that turned up and decided that he'd kind of cross these cultures? Nobody had an answer, of course. You know, we just never know, and you know, culture hides more than what it reveals, doesn't it? And it hides it from its own participants. So nobody can ever give me an answer.
And sometimes it doesn't really matter how it started, because if the majority of people decides this is really delicious and we want to have this again, and we tie it to a certain event, and this is where I get a little nerdy, because these are anchors, right? These are full full sensory-based experiences that we connect to a certain emotional state. So the emotional state is that of maybe family, togetherness, harmony, whatever it may be, whatever you associate with a certain holiday. And you eat the food, you smell the food, you touch it with your mouth, you taste it, you hear the crunch or softness of the bite, and you hear it cooking in the oven. This is a full rounded sensory memory that will follow us for a lifetime, and it's no wonder these traditions have such a strong impact on us, because it's not just a blip on the screen. It's like a full-on explosion on the radar. Yes, this is what we do. Right?
Yeah, and as we've discussed before,
he saw a story that the Chinese apparently also eat KFC. Well, I will not be saying the same.
There you go.
There we go.
Interesting. Yeah. So we know that you can just imagine the Jewish family walking into a Chinese restaurant and smelling that food. It would almost seem like a tradition now. It's so embedded in the culture that you know, maybe whenever you smell Chinese food, it takes you to that kind of tradition of doing that. Because whereas we discussed before, we've got these senses, but we've also got that important sense of smell, which is the only one that's direct to the limbic system. And of course, you know, fires off all those all the neurons that make us feel safe and homey, and, you know, connect us to these memories. It's really interesting.
And even if you're not Jewish, let me send out an idea. Maybe that's something you want to entertain. The idea is, Jewish or not, find yourself a Chinese restaurant nearby and maybe order some takeout, because if you haven't read the news, especially in this country, in the United States, of all the restaurants that were affected by the pandemic, Chinese restaurants were affected the worst. Yeah. And a lot of it may very well be due to the fact that some people have not only less money to spend on restaurants and takeout, maybe they selectively did not spend their money with Asian restaurants for reasons that I don't need to decipher here for you. You're smart enough to figure this out on your own. So maybe you want to support a Chinese restaurant just because, whether you're Jewish or not.
Absolutely. That's a good idea. You got to love me some Chinese food. Although, you know, I'm a lot more selective now since I've actually been to China a few times and I've tasted the real thing. So it's a little bit harder to find, you know, something that satisfies those. I'm not a snob. Don't you call me a snob. I'm not a snob. I'm not a Chinese food snob.
Why don't you just fly to Oakland and go somewhere in the Bay Area and find the more authentic, or Vancouver maybe. You'll find some more authentic things.
Absolutely. Up in Richmond Hill, up in Toronto. Yeah, that's where you find some real good traditional Chinese. Who we got here? Frank.
Big shout out to my friend Frank Pastanaki in Germany. Merry Xmas to you back, Frank.
That looks like a Polish name.
I'm sure he's got some Polish heritage. I'll ask him next time.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Well, that was going to be a short one. It's Christmas Day. You know, hope you're enjoying time with the family, whether you're celebrating Christmas or not. Or you might be, if you're watching this from a Chinese table and you're Jewish, you know, welcome. I'm sure. Like Patricia, our friend Patricia the other day was sitting at a table having brunch with her daughter and watching this crazy show, which we are this is a Friday. It's episode 120. Thank you again. If you like what you hear, consider subscribing to our channels and hit us up on Facebook, LinkedIn, whatever channel, whatever avenue you're, and tell us what are your favorite traditions inside or outside of Christmas.
Hit the like buttons, hit the share buttons, make comments, tell people about it.
Absolutely.
Let people come to us.
Yes.
Merry Christmas to those of you who celebrate it, and for the rest of you, happy Festivus for the rest of us, and enjoy your Friday, and we'll be back fresh and recouped from this overeating, indulging weekend on Monday.
I forgot that. I've got some real problems with you people.